What is going on, everybody? We finally got opening day in the books, and it included a little bit of everything. Unfortunately, we had Juan Soto testing positive for COVID-19 early in the day. Later on, Clayton Kershaw gets scratched. Then an hour of lock. We had a rain-affected game that was shortened. So if you were itching for MLB DFS to get back, you were waiting for every component of MLB DFS, and you got just about all of it in last night's slate. But today, we get an 11-game slate once again for this Friday. It's locks at 7:05 p.m. Eastern, so we are back to the regular grind here of MLB DFS. We're going to break things down, 3 pitchers, 3 stacks, and 3 things to watch to get you set for tonight's action. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to take a look at tonight's 11-game main slate over on FanDuel. That means that it does not include some of the games that begin earlier in the day, which means you do have until 7:05 for lock. And personally, I prefer it that way because it allows us to get the lineups for most of the West Coast games before lock hits. That is, unless you are the San Francisco Giants. Not their fault because Kershaw was a lefty, Dustin May was a righty, so it makes sense that the lineup was late last night. But hey, again, we got to get the full MLB DFS experience in as we kick all this off. Looking at the weather for tonight, there is a chance of rain in Philadelphia for the Marlins and the Phillies. I think they should be okay to play. Kind of looks similar to last night's Nationals game, though, so that could change. That's why we have the Twitch show later on, the Twitch and YouTube show. We'll talk about it in just 1 second. There is no rain in Oakland, but the temperature there is just 53 degrees. That is the coldest on the slate by 16 degrees. It's one of just 2 games with the first pitch temperature under 70 degrees. For hitters, you want it to be hot and humid, and for pitchers, you want it cold. Hitters there are superbly unattractive as a result of this weather, and you do want to bump both the A's and the Angels down based on the weather out in Oakland for tonight. One thing I mentioned within there is that things can change throughout the day, which is why we've added an additional show here on FanDuel, on the FanDuel YouTube page. That's at 4 p.m. We will be going live on YouTube, Twitch, and I think a couple other places as well, answering any questions you may have about MLB DFS as lineups start to come out. So I'll be looking at lineups, breaking down some value plays that pop up as a result of where guys are hitting in those lineups. So I'd recommend checking that out. 4 p.m. Eastern time over on the FanDuel YouTube and Twitch pages. We are also streaming the Solo Shot live on YouTube every weekday as well. That goes live at 9 a.m. But of course, as you know, you can also get it by subscribing to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Also have a UFC podcast in there for this weekend. Austin Swaim did that one solo because I was preoccupied with NASCAR and baseball. Big thank you to Austin for that. Thought he did a really good job. So if you're playing UFC for tomorrow, I think it's like 15 fights on the card. Make sure you check out Austin's thoughts in the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. For years, numberFire's premium subscription service has provided our users with expert analysis, survivor pool tools, and most importantly, the fantasy football draft kit, all for up to $49.99 a month. Now, as a way of saying thank you to our community for years of support, numberFire is rolling out a new premium package for just $9.99 a month. I will provide you with all the sports betting and daily fantasy tools you need year-round. The best part is that expert analysis, those survivor tools, and yes, even the draft kit are now free. Head to numberFire.com and check out the new and improved site and take advantage of the new premium package. So if you've been looking for the season-long rankings for myself, JG Zacharias, and Brandon Gadula, those are free. So make sure you check it out over at numberFire.com. And all content, everything that is written by a human being, is free on numberFire as well. Pitching preview for this Friday main slate over on FanDuel. Justin Verlander is the most expensive pitcher. He clocks in with a salary of $11,200. Jack Flaherty is $10,500, followed by Shane Bieber at $10,200. Aaron Nola against the Marlins, $9,900. Lucas Giolito is $95,000, but he's facing the Twins. On the other side of that game, Jose Berrios is facing the White Sox. He is $9,200. Madison Bumgarner, $9,000. Then we have Chris Paddock, Brandon Woodruff, Lance Lynn, Herman Marquez, all between $8,000 and $9,000. And in general, I am interested in paying down a bit of pitcher for this slate because there are a couple of options at stack in the stacking section where I do want to try to get some expensive stacks in. but I'm also very okay splurging on Justin Verlander at 11-2. Now, I'll preface this by saying Verlander is not my favorite option, but he is one of the top 3 guys. So we'll go through him here and then talk about 2 other guys I like, including one I like more than Verlander in just 1 second. Verlander is obviously very skilled. We shouldn't need to talk too much about him individually here. For the full season last year, Verlander had a 2.95 skill interactive ERA with a 35% strikeout rate, and both those are easily tops on the slate. When you put that up against a not-so-hot offense in the Seattle Mariners, good things will generally happen. The team has basically been gutted of most of their impactful bats. Their active roster has an 88 WRC plus with a 31% hard hit rate and a 26% strikeout rate against righties. Once again, you can find those active roster numbers over at Fangraphs.com. Click the active roster number. That'll show you last year's marks. Whether that player was on that specific team or not, their numbers will be populated there if they're on the active roster. And that's why Verlander is worth his salary. Good pitcher, at home, facing a bad offense. The reason that I don't think he is a must-use player is that he's changing his mechanics for this year. He was going through some injuries back in the spring, and he's trying to make his health better, so changing things up from where it was last year. Now, Verlander could wind up being the exact same pitcher. And if he's that, he is very worth 11-2, but that's an unknown. He could wind up taking a step back in the strikeout department, and that's the reason we are paying for Justin Verlander is to get those strikeouts. He also threw to 74 pitches in his final start before the season. I'm not sure what his pitch count will be here. I would guess it would be down from last year, though, and so I like Verlander. But it's not enough for me to label him as a must-use player. Even in a great matchup, I think it helps that there are a lot of great alternatives. So although Justin Verlander is within my top 3 pitchers for tonight, he is not number 1. The mechanic changes combined with some questions around the pitch count are enough to make me potentially put him down in 3rd. I'm still deciding where I actually want to rank him, but he might be down in 3rd for tonight. That's why I am on board. The concerns around Verlander are why I am on board with jumping down to Shane Bieber as my cash game pitcher for the slate and my number 1 pitcher overall. Bieber is not quite as good as Verlander, but he's pretty darn close because last year Bieber started to emphasize his curveball more often as the season went along, and specifically he did that over his final 26 starts. And 26 starts is a robust sample. If you are a returning listener to the Solo Shot, you know I will talk about 2-start samples. I don't care as long as they have reason for me to buy into them. Like if there is a change in the pitch mix, something like that, if I'm looking at swinging strike rate, strikeout rate, things like that stabilize quickly, I'm okay looking at very small samples. 26 starts, not a small sample. And in that time, Bieber had a 3.18 skill interactive ERA with a 31% strikeout rate, a 4% walk rate. You don't get a whole lot better than that. And he did still let up a lot of hard contact because his hard hit rate was 43%. And that's always going to be an issue with Shane Bieber. He's going to allow hard contact. That is a known issue. And the Royals have some individual players who can hit the ball a long way. But overall, they're not the most imposing lineup. Their active roster had a 94 WRC plus against righties last year with a 38% hard hit rate and a 35% fly ball rate. I also feel good with Bieber from a pitch count perspective, at least as good as you can feel about players in these weird situations. I tried to go through the pitch counts of each guy on this slate in their warm-ups, and it seemed like Bieber was going to be pretty stretched out. So I think you can make the case as him being the top option for tournaments too, especially with the $1,000 discount from Justin Verlander. So Bieber in cash, probably Bieber in tournaments as well. Jack Flaherty's pretty solid because he's good. The Pirates are bad, but they just don't strike out as much as the Royals or the Mariners. So Verlander's above Flaherty for me, but he's not above Bieber. So Bieber in cash, Bieber number 1 in tournaments, Verlander ahead of Flaherty, but I'm not sure if he's going to be ahead of our 3rd pitcher. Let's talk about him here. As mentioned, I do want to save some additional salary where I can so I can splurge in my stacks. Bieber is not super prohibitive. I think you can use him while still getting some of the expensive teams I want to use. But if I want to save even more, I'm going to go Lance Lynn. Lynn was a fixture in the second half on the Solo Shot last year because he was pitching super deep into games. He was getting tons of strikeouts, and he threw 83 pitches in his final exhibition start this year. And I think the length we saw from Lynn will be there once again this year. it was a big uptick from what we saw from him in previous season. That big uptick really started when he was leaning more on his four-seam fastball. And over the final 22 starts, where that fastball was being more featured, he had a 3.57 skill interactive ERA with a 30% strikeout rate. That 30% strikeout rate, when you pair it with the pitches he was throwing and putting him at $8,300, is really, really fun. He also gets to pitch in a better home park now than where he was previously, because Texas is moving to a new park with a retractable roof. That might get him out of the hot Texas air a good chunk of the time. Looking at the temperatures for today, 94 degrees. I would not be shocked if they were to shut that thing up. And the total in this game is 9.5. I would be very inclined to take the under in that game based on how good Lynn is, how good Herman Marquez can be at times, how bad these offenses can be. So I think the total here may push people away from Lynn. I will not be one of those people. I am very okay going here as well. As mentioned, it's a good matchup for Lance Lynn. The Rockies offense, pretty bad once you take it out of Coors. They had an 82 WRC plus against righties last year with a 22% strikeout rate. So Lynn checks all the boxes. He has length. He has lots of strikeouts. He is at home. I would say it's a decent park for pitching right now, or at least not an actively bad one as it was previously, and it's a good matchup here with the Rockies. And I think that if you want to talk yourself into Lance Lynn and cash, probably not going to talk you out of it. I guess that's the way that I would phrase it. I prefer Bieber personally, but I would not fault you at all if you wanted to go Lynn at $8,300. I think that he is awesome if you want to load up a hitter, and there will be times where I want to do so. And I am someone who is not always in on lower salary pitchers. I am generally very hesitant on these guys, but not all low salary pitchers have the strikeout rate of Lance Lynn. So I think for here, I am very willing to pay down. I think that my tournament rankings right now are Bieber 1. I would go Lynn 2, Verlander 3 in that order. We'll talk about one more lower salary pitcher in things to watch. With that said, let's dive into the stacks for today. And the reason that we have incentive to spend down a pitcher is that the Red Sox, Dodgers, and Astros are all in really good spots for tonight, and none of them are super cheap. So Lynn will be hard to turn down. I think you can stack some of them with Bieber, and that might make Verlander a bit more tough. And that's why I'm okay putting him third on the list in addition to the mechanic changes. I will still try to make it happen, but it's enough to lower my thoughts on him at least a bit. Among the three stacking options we discussed, the Red Sox, Dodgers, and Astros, my favorite is the Red Sox against Tommy Milone. Milone is not some terrible pitcher. Like, he's not. He's not a terrible pitcher. He's not on par with most of the starters on this slate. It's opening day, probably going to put your best out there. When Milone was pitching last year, the team used an opener before him, and even with the opener being there, and he didn't have to face the top guys in the order as often, he still had a 4.76 ERA for the full season. He allowed a ton of balls in play with a 21% strikeout rate and a 5% walk rate. Now, he didn't allow a ton of hard contact. Like, it wasn't an outlierishly low number, but it also wasn't super high. But with so many balls in play, with that low strikeout rate and low walk rate, the raw number of hard hit balls was high enough for us to get excited about stacking against him in DFS. Milone also lets us target either lefties or righties, because he did have more strikeouts against lefties, but he also allowed a bunch of hard contact to those hitters. So Rafael Devers, despite being lefty on lefty here, $3,600, he's an option. Didn't have great results against lefties last year. We've seen in the past be really good against lefties. Andrew Benintendi had a 43% hard hit rate and a 40% fly ball rate against lefties last year. I can get behind that. So while we should give preference to the righties for sure, the lefties are in play, especially with Benintendi being 72 or 27 and Alex Verdugo being $2,300 if he plays. So potential value in Benintendi and Verdugo here with the Red Sox, and then Devers, I would assume, contrarian stud at $3,600. The second best stack among the more expensive ones to me will be the Los Angeles Dodgers. We're going to talk about the Astros and things to watch, and you could easily make a case for them here, but they're facing Marco Gonzalez, and he does a really good job in limiting hard contact. Jeff Samardzija doesn't do that as much, which is a good thing for LA. Now, the Giants, I should note, have not officially announced Samardzija as their starter. I would think it's pretty fair to assume he will be. They've not announced any starters beyond last night with Cueto, but apparently Samardzija could not hit 90 miles per hour on the gun in their scrimmage a week ago. That's pretty concerning. But the bigger thing is what he did last year. Samardzija, despite having a really good ERA, had a 4.97 skill interactive ERA with a 19% strikeout rate and a 39% hard hit rate over his final 14 starts, where he was emphasizing his cutter a bit more. Samardzija especially struggled with lefties. They had a 47% fly ball rate against him compared to 36% for righties. So I'm still willing to use the righties in this Dodgers lineup, but we have to bump the lefties up. And, the Dodgers have a good number of quality lefties. Based on last night's game, where they were also facing a righty, we'd have Corey Seager at $3,200 and Jock Peterson at $3,000 among the mid-range guys, Cody Bellinger, Max Muncy at the top end among the studs. I'm okay with all those guys. I am also okay with the more mid-range righties, guys like Justin Turner and Will Smith, assuming that Smith is the catcher for tonight. And Kiki Hernandez hit sixth last night. He's $2,600, and last year, Hernandez actually had a 40% hard hit rate with a 45% fly ball rate against righties. So if Kike bats sixth again, I am fully in on him for sure. I think that, again, Turner and Smith, totally awesome, but the main focus of this Dodgers team will be the lefties in Seager and Peterson. They would be the first places I would turn to when facing Samardzija. Again, if the Giants announce someone else is starting, we'll talk about that on the Twitch and YouTube show this afternoon, but for now, we'll assume it will be Samardzija, and that would lead us towards the Dodgers. Now, if you pepper some mid-range Dodgers and Red Sox, you can also get to Verlander as long as your second stack is a value one. As long as you're okay with potentially not getting Francisco Lindor, Cleveland could be a standout option in that department because they're facing Danny Duffy, and Duffy was going through some things last year, trying to experiment, trying to reinvigorate his stuff. And over the final 14 starts, he basically cut out his curveball, leaned more on his four-seam fastball and his slider. And it did increase his strikeout rate a bit, so mission accomplished there. But Duffy still allowed tons of hard contact. He allowed a 42% hard hit rate with a 44% fly ball rate overall. And if you look at just right-handed batters, that hard hit rate goes up to 46%. The strikeout rate was still even at 21%. So Cleveland has lost some pitching, which I think is why I can be skeptical about them as a team for this year, but they can very much still hit, and I am willing to stack them against a lot of pitchers, especially here when we have so many good pitchers on the slate. We find more of a middling one like Danny Duffy. I'm okay going there. Cleveland's active roster at a 104 WRC plus against lefties last year. Not a lot of strikeouts, and that's interesting against a guy like Danny Duffy. They also have a lot of value in the middle of this Cleveland lineup right now. Franmil Reyes is $2,700. Domingo Santana is $2,500. Jordan Luplow, if he plays, $2,200. Oscar Mercado is $2,700. So I'm not sure where those guys are going to hit, but you're going to get some really good bats at high leverage spots in the order. My hope is that Mercado bats leadoff instead of Cesar Hernandez, who isn't as good against lefties. I'd rather have just Mercado at leadoff. Like if we get Mercado leadoff with Framio batting fifth or so and Domingo batting sixth, we're partying, baby. It's pants off at that point because they would be a really, really high-quality value stack. So check out the Cleveland order once it's out. We'll talk about this on the afternoon show. But either way, this will be the team to target if you want help getting to Verlander. And depending on which of those guys play, you could even get to guys like Lindor or Jose Ramirez as well. So Cleveland, I think, a really good stacking option for today, regardless of where you go at your pitcher. Let's finish up here with things to watch. I mentioned Lance Lynn as one lower salary pitcher, and I think that Brandon Woodruff is another good option. He's on the road against the Cubs, so that's why he's not a cash game option and not in the same tier as Bieber, Verlander, or Lynn. But he's good for tourneys because last year Woodruff increased his sinker usage over his final 12 starts, and that's always kind of concerning because the sinker is not a high strikeout pitch. But even with doing that, Woodruff's strikeout rate's still 28%. Didn't let up any hard contact, which is the benefit of a sinker. So Woodruff is below Lynn among the lower salaried options, but he is still very much in play for me. And if I'm multi-entry for tournaments, I want to make sure I get some Brandon Woodruff in there as well. I didn't talk about the Astros and stacks, but I do think they are a great option, especially if you go Woodruff or Lynn at pitcher. They're facing Gonzalez, and he's really good at limiting hard contact. Like, that is his specialty. But he also lets up a ball in play to 75% of the batters he faced, at least based on his final 12 starts last year. The Astros never strike out, so they're going to put the ball in play, and good things happen when you can do that as often as they do. We got Yuli Gurriel and Carlos Correa as pretty affordable options. Outside of that, I think that it's a team that we're stacking just when you go with either Woodruff or Lind. But again, it's pretty viable to do that. So I think you can still get a good amount of Astros stacks there tonight, despite the high salaries on their hitters. Finally, if you need some more hitters, last night we stacked the Giants. Didn't go so well, but we're going to go back to a different, really bad team today. I kind of don't hate the idea of using some Orioles against Nathan Eovaldi because Eovaldi could be really good this year. We've seen flashes from him, but he didn't look as good last year when he got chances to start. 22% strikeout rate as a starter, 13% walk rate. He was coming off an injury, so it's easy to understand the struggles, but it's at least interesting, and the Orioles have a ton of lower salaried bats. Anthony Santander actually had a 47% fly ball rate against righties last year. If Francisco were to start over Pedro Severino, he can bang it a bit. Austin Hayes is $2,400. A little bit of stolen base juice there, along with some power. And I mentioned all those guys if you need help. Like if you need just a one-off hitter, I think that I would gravitate first towards the Cleveland guys. But if you want one more value guy and you're already stacking Cleveland, I don't hate the idea of going Baltimore. So we'll talk about the Baltimore order later today. Maybe we can find some value there. But I think overall, if we're looking at the composition of this slate between the value bats on Cleveland, the mid-range guys on Boston and on Los Angeles, you can afford the high-salaried pitchers, and I want to do so. But I'm also okay using someone like Lance Lynn if I want to get up to guys, the stud guys within the stacks we discussed before. So a lot of routes for attacking this slate. That is all the time that we have for today on the Solo Shot. But once again, back later today, we'll be breaking down lineups as they come out right here on the FanDuel Twitch page and the FanDuel YouTube page. So make sure you are subscribed to those. Next week, back with our regular schedule once again, full time with the Solo Shot every weekday, live on YouTube at 9 a.m. and of course in the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page and subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed as well. PGA podcast, NASCAR podcast, a couple of UFC podcasts every now and then, and NBA back next week with Tom Vecchio and the Daily ISO as well. So it is a great time to be a sports fan and a great time to subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. I hope last night went well for you, and I hope that today goes even better. If you have any questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Good luck tonight and this weekend. We'll talk to you again on Monday. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.